Hello everyone, I'm Apoorva Shankar, Assistant Professor from the Department of Life Sciences, Christianity College. Today we'll discuss about the phylogenetic tree. What is a phylogenetic tree? A phylogenetic tree is a diagram that represents the evolutionary relationships among organisms based on the similarities and differences in their genetic and evolutionary characteristics. This pattern of branching in a phylogenetic tree reflects how species or other groups are evolved from a series of a common ancestor. The phylogenetic tree is also called the tree of life. It is also referred to as dendrogram. So let us look into the history. The branching of the phylogenetic trees include a paleontological chart showing the geological relationships among plants and animals in the Book of Elementary Geology by Edwin Hitchcock in 1840. Charles Darwin in 1859 also produced one of the first illustrations and crucially popularized the notion of evolutionary tree, the seminal book, The Origin of Species. So what is the importance of the phylogenetic tree? It is a very fundamental tool to derive the most useful evidences from the fields of anatomy, embryology, paleontology, and molecular genetics. Other significances include it is used in the search of a new species in order to study the evolutionary history, in order to study how species were spread geographically, to study the common ancestors of extinct species. It is used to identify the most recent common ancestor and to recognize how closely related each species are. It can be used to relate the milestones of evolution of major life forms to the tree of life. It is used to represent the evolutionary relationship between organisms that are believed to have some common ancestry. With the help of the phylogenetic tree, the infectious microbes can also be traced along with their evolutionary histories. So these are the common terms which are very important when studying the phylogenetic tree. Phylogeny, it is a method to construct a phylogenetic tree. Common ancestor. Common ancestors are the group of organisms sharing the common feature with the descendants. Taxon. An organism of entire taxa is called as a taxon. Taxa. A group of organisms from species or from a different species. Node. Nodes represent the common ancestors of different taxons. Then you have the sister group. Two or more taxons share the same node and they are called a sister group. Outgroup. The taxon is outside the interest group or other than the common ancestor. A clade. A clade is a group of organisms from a common ancestor. So this is how the different phylogenetic tree looks like. So here we have a clade. We have a node, we have a root. The root symbolizes the ancestor and the different types of sister branching and the taxon. So here is an example of grandparents and how the cousins, parents, and siblings evolved. So there are different types of trees. You have a rooted tree, an unrooted tree, a bifurcating tree, and a multifurcating tree. So let us look into each thing now. The rooted tree. A rooted tree is described as a phylogenetic tree sharing the common ancestor on the node. Therefore, the classification ends at one point, usually on the node, which is the common ancestor of all the branches of the tree. So here, in this case, there is a root for the evolution of cat, dog, rat, and mouse. Next, we have the unrooted tree. Contrary to the rooted tree, the unrooted tree does not have a common ancestor. The unrooted phylogenetic tree is always prepared from the rooted tree by excluding the common ancestor or the node of the tree. Next is the bifurcating tree. The phylogenetic tree only has two branches, or we can say the leaves are known as bifurcating trees. It is also classified in the rooted bifurcation trees and unrooted bifurcating trees. So then we have the multifurcating tree. The multifurcating tree is described as having the multiple branches on a single node. Again, it is classified into a rooted multifurcating tree, and you can also have an unrooted multifurcating tree. So this is the bifurcating tree on my right, a tree that bifurcates and has maximum of two descendants arising from each of the interior nodes. On my right, we have the multiplicating tree, a tree that multiplicates and has a multiple descendants arising from each of the interior nodes. In the phylogeny, the node is also known as a clade as well. Though there are so many different variations of the phylogenetic tree, every method of making a tree depicts some type of information. Taking the look of various trees shown in this figure, so we can see that how A, B, C, and D varies in representing the same data, which can be represented in different ways. Keeping in mind that whatever the shape and the topology of the structure of the tree is, it must have a common node or the rooted or an ancestor, and then it is branched. To read a tree, start with the tip of the branch always and see where the branch ends, that is the node. Based on that information, you can depict and conclude which organism is near or closely related and which is distantly related. So here we can see that in the diagram B, the A and B are closely related to each other and the A is distantly related to the D. That is how we read a phylogenetic tree. So this is an example of the phylogeny in fungus. So Basidiomycota and Ascomycotas are closely related to each other, whereas Basidiomycota is distinctly related to Chytridomycota. So this is an example of a rooted phylogenetic tree with bifurcations. So the different clades, that is the Basidiomycota, Ascomycota, Globeromycota, and Zygomycota, you can see their relatedness by the way they are connected. The steps in phylogenetic analysis: selection of an organism or a gene family, and then followed by choosing appropriate molecular markers, amplification and sequencing and assembly, alignment of the gene, and then building the evolutionary model and phylogenetic analysis, reconstruction, and then the evaluation of the phylogenetic tree. There are various softwares which are available for the constructions of the phylogenetic tree. Applications of phylogenetic tree. The phylogenetic tree is constructed to make an evolutionary link between various organisms. By doing so, we can get an idea of how different the organisms have evolved. Also, it helps to classify the organisms and species in different taxa and groups based on their DNA sequences and find phenotypic similarities and differences. In addition to this, it is useful to study the force of evolution and the characteristics of different organisms. It is applicable to study the events occurring during the course of evolution and to classify species based on their divergence or structure and function. The limitations of phylogenetic tree. Firstly, the manual process of constructing the tree is very tedious and it is time consuming. The construction of the tree can also be done using various softwares. To construct the tree based on the DNA and protein sequence variations, and a lot of lab work is needed prior making a phylogenetic tree. If we want to construct a phylogenetic tree of 100 different organisms for a couple of genes, DNA extraction, amplification, and DNA sequences had to be performed on all the 100 samples prior to making the phylogenetic tree, which is tedious. The biggest limitation of the present technique is its accuracy. The phylogeny method to different organisms or species is not very accurate. In addition to this, not all the characteristics can be taken into account for constructing a single tree. It will confuse things and will not give an accurate divergence. Another limitation of the present technique is that we cannot quantify the divergence between the two species. For instance, get back to the example 1, starting with the article of taxon 1 and share it to the common ancestor node of 1 and taxon 3 for common ancestor node 2, but in which amount of taxa to carry the divergence we don't know. Further, it is also difficult to explain which organism can be placed first in the sister group. So this is about the phylogenetic tree. Thank you.